What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. Maybe you heard Dick Cheney has died. Next story. So I don't have time to get into it today, but I just wanted to flag there's a fight going on within MAGA, and it's like pretty existential. And it's not, as anti-MAGA, it's kind of like love to see it, the Michael Jackson eating popcorn meme. But it's all about the degree to which Nazism should be included within the MAGA movement and within the Republican Party. And it's really centers on like Tucker Carlson platforming Nick Fuentes, and it's all a bunch of like really gross shit. But the president of the Heritage Foundation came out with a statement of tolerance toward Nazis, or inclusion of Nazis, kind of, and he like laced it with a bunch of anti-Semitic dog whistles. I wish I had more time to spend on this, but there's like other shit to get to. I just wanted to flag it because it's kind of a big, like, this could end up being like a really big deal. And it in a weird way, it's the anti-Semitism, which is toxic and basically evil, is the sort of ideological basis of anti-Zionism on the right. So anti-Zionism is good politics, right? Opposition to Israeli state policies is good politics. Not wanting to send weapons to Israel is good politics. But when MAGA takes those positions, it's from this foundation of basically racism toward the Jews. Classic, So, but like that's a contested thing. That shit's going on in MAGA right now. Right. So that is what it is. Put a pin in that from now. Maybe we'll address it more later. The big thing, off the top of the dome, Zohran Mamdani, my man, he is the mayor of New York City, officially. Democratic socialist, anti-imperialist. This is like amazing. Rebellions are built on hope, and I'm a sucker for hope. We needed this one. And the beauty of it, and the reason why certain people are shook by this and terrified of it, it's not an anomaly. Like, Zohran is representative of a class of politicians from my generation and from Gen Z a little bit, but mostly millennials, who have a broadly anti-imperialist politics, who have a broad commitment to democratic socialism, give or take. And we have a diagnosis of what ails society, and the politics that we represent tries to respond to that diagnosis. This is very simple, and that means people power. That means standing on the side of the working class. And that is a threat to the political status quo. That is a threat to the establishment. That is a threat to the established order. That is a threat to capitalist interests, or those who benefit most from the existing system, which is the billionaires, the oligarchs, right? So that's what's at stake here. I wanted to share one, just because I'm like vibing out so much on this shit. I wanted to share this little song that was cut together.
Mamdani. The name is Mamdani. From the Bangladeshi auntie to the parents, strangers, thank you for Navi. Fight for working people, no apology. Fight for a city that works for everybody. From Port Richmond to Jackson Heights, from Hunter Bay Ridge to the Florida to the rice. We deserve a city we can afford, and a life of dignity where we can do more than keep on the lights. Make buses fast and free. Eliminate the fare, make them move with ease. Freeze the rent, build housing for everyone's needs. Childcare at no cost to parents. Not a green when I look out onto the midnight skyline. I see strangers in each other in dark time. We won with the most votes in city history. Victory shattered Cuomo's inevitability. The billionaires not scared. Work day and night to stop. Mamdani is Mamdani. From the Bangladeshi auntie to the parents, strangers, thank you for Navi. Fight for working people, no apology. Fight for a city that works for everybody. From Port Richmond to Jackson Heights, from Harlem to Bay Ridge to the Florida to the rice. We deserve a city we can afford, and a life of dignity to learn how to pronounce my name? Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Right now, it's off the top of the dome.
Zohran.
Motherfucker. God damn, that's good shit. Fuck yeah. Great. I don't know who cut that together, but props to them. The one thing I did want to flag of substance on Zoran's win, it's not all hugs and rainbows and cheery shit. This really does set up I wrote about this in the newsletter, right? But it sets up a conflict or a showdown that is inevitable in American politics at this point. But like the class war that's happening and the victory that Zoran represents, like if you look at the breakdown of who voted for him and who didn't, basically only capitalists didn't vote for him. And when I say capitalists, I don't mean people who believe in the free market. If you believe in the free market, you're not a capitalist. You just have a particular ideology that favors free market capitalism. If you're a capitalist, it means you own capital, you own the means of production, or you own financial assets, right? That's not most people. And in New York, especially, that's not most people. And the capitalist class, the capitalists in New York, were the ones who spent like fucking crazy to stop him. Zoran made a joke about this shit. He was like, they're spending more to defeat me than I would charge them in taxes, which is fucking, an amazing, if it rhymed, it'd be an amazing bar, But they're the losers, like the who benefits, who pays schema in politics that is the basis of politics, but which politicians try to sometimes obscure. It's the oligarchs and the billionaires who lose, relatively speaking, so that the people can have power, so that the people can have a minimum level of economic security, free buses, public grocery stores, childcare, etc. Right? I mention all that because the Trump administration, as we know, has been committing crimes, just waking up every day and it's like, what dirt can I do today? Let's get into some more fucking thievery, right? Let's kill some more people illegally. And that's the Trump administration in a nutshell. Like that's what's been going on. And that ends up mattering because while the Trump administration is not accountable right now, everybody knows how flagrant and corrupt the administration is. The crimes, it's the rap sheet longer than my fucking arm, right? And so why does that matter? Because if you're doing crimes flagrantly, you cannot afford to be out of power. The reason you're able to act with impunity is because you're in power. You control the levers of the state. That means you cannot afford to lose the levers of the state. So you got to stay in power by any means necessary. If you're MAGA, if you're Trump. And that means they're going to either let themselves, like Trump and Vance are going to let themselves be at risk of fucking prosecution for high crimes, for war crimes, for all manner of crimes, or they're going to escalate their war on the working class and the democratic elites, which they've been doing since day one. But they're going to have to step it up massively. They're going to have to not allow elections to proceed free and fair, or maybe not at all, right? They can't have this shit. And when you look at what like Laura Loomer and Trump are saying, like their reactions to Mamdani, the day Zoran won, she posted this tweet. Eugene Debs was indicted for violating the Espionage Act of 1917. Mamdani is an enemy combatant. And then the day before the election, Trump had this long screed. Jesus, it's so long. I'm not even going to read the whole thing. But like he says, if communist candidate Zohran Mamdani wins the election, it's highly unlikely that I will be contributing federal funds. Also, that would be illegal to deny federal funds, other than the very minimum to my beloved first home. This great city has zero chance of success or even survival because he's a communist. Communist. He says communist 7 times in this one giant tweet. So what do we do with that? Well, it means that we're building up, like, there's kind of a civil war happening. It's just that, like, it's the state repressing the people. Like, people are not fighting back. They're protesting and they're staying peaceful, right? And they're not withholding their labor from the system yet. They're not general striking yet. So that is Trump is going to force something like one of those two things to happen. You know, the New York Times 2 weeks ago had a story. The title was "Trump is not afraid of civil war. Neither is Stephen Miller." And then the story was basically like the journalist surveying a bunch of political scientists and comparativists who are experts in civil war and in American politics in civil war in like other countries to say that basically like the conditions for civil war are ripe in America. Trump is basically doing it, and he's goading people to respond in a civil war like manner, and that's what would justify him using the Insurrection Act, which is what unleashes the troops on the people, right? And that is just fucking like we're obviously incredibly razor thin close to that, but he's trying to push it there. And what I'm trying to say is that like Zohran's win and it is not isolated. And as others in my generation with our politics, as we start to win across the board, especially like this is what 2026 is shaping up to be. The 2026 election is going to be a giant blue wave, even though the Democrats are world historically unpopular, because it's not the Democratic Party leadership that people are voting for. It's it's progressive politics, it's social democratic politics, it's a better deal for workers, and it's anti-incumbency, it's anti-MAGA, anti-Trump. And since MAGA and Trump is all about them war crimes of various kinds, well, do the math. MAGA's not going to let this election go free and fair if they let it go at all. And in the meantime, they're going to unleash untold violence against the left, against Democratic Party. They're going to fuck with Zohran. They're going to fuck with New York. They're going to fuck with me and you. That's what's coming. You know, communist, communist, communist. We're all fucking communists now, right? Anyways, props to Zohran. Big, big win. We needed this one. Next thing I wanted to talk about is the reality of like an invisible Great Depression or a hidden Great Depression. Our economic circumstances, I mean, globally, they're not great, right? The decline of growth is like a global thing. But in America, they're insanely acute. And I get reports from friends and family in the States. The shelves are not as full as they used to be, and the stuff that's on the shelf is becoming like prohibitively expensive. Christmas is becoming fucking can I even speak right? Prohibitively expensive. It's hard times out there. And some, even though we're not get the books are cooked now under Trump, but like we're getting some data that corroborates this. And I've been trying to explain this for a while. US companies just announced the most job cuts for any October in more than 2 decades, since 2003, right? Consumer sentiment is at its lowest level since 2008. Look at this list of companies, the layoffs that are anticipated here, right? UPS, 48,000 layoffs announced. Amazon, up to 30,000 fuckers. Intel, 24,000. Nestle, 16,000. Accenture, the consulting firm. So they're the white collar work as well, right? 11,000 employees. Ford, 11,000 employees. 3,800. These Ford layoffs, by the way, 3,800 of these or something like that. I can't remember the exact number. It's in the green, in the EV market, their sector, right? Because under the Trump administration, it's all fucking fossil fuels and anti-green transition shit, right? Novo Nordisk, 9,000 employees. Microsoft, 7,000 employees laid off. PwC, another white-collar firm, 5,600 employees. Salesforce, 4,000. Paramount, which is becoming like the far-right streamer of choice. I don't know if you saw the UFC deal that they announced, and David Ellison, who's one of the oligarchs that is in the Trump orbit, he just bought Paramount, right? 2,000 employees being laid off there. And according to my Hollywood people, another 2,000 are going to be announced soon. Target, Kroger, Facebook, all layoffs. This is fucking brutal, dude. This is way worse, by the way, than the 2008 financial crisis, which was one of the moments in history that shaped what it means to be a millennial, that and the Iraq War, right? So you want to know where millennial politics comes from. It comes from opposition to the Iraq War, which was a fucking obvious travesty that elites did with impunity. And then the global financial crisis, which was the corporate version of the Iraq War, right? It was an economy for the few that soaked the many. We watched it happen, and then we watched the banks get bailed out and not the fucking people. And shit ain't been the same ever since. And the economy ain't been the same ever since. And that's what gave rise to the Occupy movement in 2011. And that's what gave rise to Bernie Sanders and the rise of socialism as a fucking answer to these fucking problems that elites have no interest in confronting or dealing with. The data is coming in, right? And then you see tariffs compounding the cost of living crisis, of course, right? You see hundreds of thousands of furloughed government workers this year, plus the government shutdown, which means most government workers are not just getting paid at all, right? Republicans apparently illegally denying 40 million people SNAP benefits, food stamps, even though they have the money for it. This is emergency shit. And yet, most of y'all, most of us are not acting like it. We are living through a long Great Depression. The data is increasingly making that undeniable. So is the reality of the people around you. You know people who've lost their jobs, for sure. And it's not being narrated. And so it's not being felt as much if you happen to be someone who's still clinging to your job. Or if you happen to be someone who has their mortgage paid already, which is probably not most of you. In those cases, you might be feeling like things are dark but normal. And that's a function of a false narrative. We're not being properly narrated, right? And this owes to a couple things. One is that Americans are drowning in propaganda, the most propagandized people on the planet. They live in information bubbles and a lack of knowledge about the world and a lack of knowledge of their own history. And I say that as somebody who's born American. But also, too, billionaire AI investment has distorted the entire macro picture of the economy. 3/4 of the gains of the S&P 500 since the launch of ChatGPT in 2022 are from AI companies whose spending is tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in excess of their revenues and their projected revenues, which is to say they're fucking flop companies. This is a bubble. It's a boom that's a bubble, and it's going to pop, and everybody knows it, right? But in the meantime, all of the extreme concentration of investment in AI, which is not producing jobs and is in fact costing jobs in the American economy, it's making the macro picture of the economy look more rosy than it actually is. So this is a distortion as well. And then you have young people, my people to an extent, like they are treating this. Jacobin had a good piece about this, actually, like financial speculation at the end of capitalism kind of shit. Young people treat the stock market as a gambling den, and it's because they have no alternative. It's because they have no savings. They don't believe that the economy or this or like retirement is going to be there for them, that they don't believe that the government's even looking out for them, because it's obviously fucking not. And so they take whatever money they get and they try to parlay that shit out of lack of alternatives. It's a desperation move. Everybody's doing it. That's why gambling is fucking everywhere. And one of the places that you do that is not just sports betting and shit. It's the stock market. It is day trading. Everybody's a fucking day trader now. I see like 19-year-old kids in my classroom who are day trading on apps. They don't know fuck all. They can barely, no offense if this is you, because some of my former students listen. Some of these kids cannot fucking write a sentence, but they're day trading, right? They don't know a fucking discounted cash flow from their asshole, but they're day trading, right? And that's just financial speculation. It's gambling. And it makes the action in the stock market look fucking vibrant because there's all kinds of shit happening. but it's just a place where people are pouring their desperation in and hoping that they get something out because they're that economically insecure. So you add all that shit up and it makes it hard to perceive accurately that we're in a long fucking Great Depression, man. And the way out of it is a total revamp of how we live and how we orient society and the society and society's productive forces. Democratic socialism offers a way, right? Zohran Mamdani in New York offers an experiment, a petri dish. And it's unfortunate that the capitalist class is going to fuck with him and the police is going to fuck with him and make it very hard for him and for New Yorkers to like really see this experiment through because it's a threat to capturing surplus value from workers. It's a threat to the system of exploitation that all the billionaires rely on. Trump did Asia. He did a trip through Asia. He attended the ASEAN Leaders Summit, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, right? He met with Japan's new, basically far-right prime minister, who is an absolute embarrassment, a sycophant to American power, but it's an embarrassment. Trump just embarrassed the shit out of Asia. And the closer you were to America, the more fucking servile and embarrassing you looked on this trip. And I think that's kind of what I want to say, right? EJ Myung in South Korea too. I like EJ Myung. He's not one of these far right leaders in Asia, but he also was a sycophant to power, right? Trump went and he took credit for a peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia in their border dispute, right? America has not had much to do with, has had historically nothing to do with that border dispute, and it was not resolved by the Trump administration, but he took credit for brokering a peace deal, quote unquote. It's all like very gross. It's very gross. And with the exception of like one or two Asia hands, one of my old co-hosts of this show, Hunter Marsden, had a good piece in 9-Line where he was like one of the few who was, calling it more critically, or like the Asia hands are all being very like rosy, overly credulous about US foreign policy in Asia. The real good piece that I saw was from Walden Bello, so a longtime heavyweight left intellectual from the Philippines, right? He had a piece in Foreign Policy in Focus. He walked through some of the stuff that I just talked about with Trump's trip to Asia, and he goes, what did these leaders get from their brazen displays of vassalage to King Donald? None of the ASEAN governments got any reduction from the punitive tariffs of 19% imposed on their exports to the United States, imposed by Trump, nor did Korea and Japan get any relief from the 15% levied on their exports. Indeed, in addition to meekly accepting the tariffs, they also had to make commitments to hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in the United States. Gross, embarrassing. And the thing, I think the thing that I wanted to say about this was like, these governments and these political leaders are not representing their people. They're actually betraying their people. And on one level, you can see that in the just wild unpopularity of the Trump administration and increasingly the unpopularity of the US because of Trump in Southeast Asia, right? There's opinion polls that bear this out. America's unpopular, not randomly, but because of what America does, right? Heavily with the tariffs, but also the volatility, the nationalism, extraterritorial claims, violations of international law and war crimes, and like could go on and on. I'm reading a book right now, and I kind of like speed read it 5-6 years ago, but it's really good and I needed to reread it for something I'm working on. It's called The Long 20th Century by Giovanni Arrighi. It's a really important book, and it's one of the few books that takes a world systems perspective and a historical materialist perspective and a macro history perspective that does that and kind of speaks in a language that international relations scholars would understand, does talk about things like the balance of power and state formations and war making and all of this stuff. So there's a lot here that's interesting for a number of my own intersections, but I just wanted to like read a little passage here because it gets at my critique of what's happening. You got a place like the Philippines, revolutionary conditions, mass revolts on the ground. I know people who've been over to the Philippines recently, and they're reporting back like dramatic, like people are fucking in the streets pissed. They're ready to overthrow the government. A lot of them because it's fucking corrupt and because in the last election they didn't have a fucking choice. And what are we doing? Well, we're still selling the Philippines more arms. We're doing freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea. A, as if that resolved anything or made anything better, but B, as if that wasn't a total contradiction with the opposite of freedom of navigation in the Caribbean, where we're illegally bombing people with impunity, right? So much for freedom of navigation. Sorry, that's a rant. My point with the Giovanni Arrighi book, he talks about American hegemony and what this means to political leaders. And this is important both because America was the world's hegemon, it was Asia's hegemon, but it's no longer Asia's hegemon, right? So he says there's a double meaning of leadership. A dominant state exercises a hegemonic function if it leads the system of states in a desired direction and in so doing is perceived as pursuing a general interest. But a dominant state may also lead in the sense that it draws other states onto its own path of development. This second kind of leadership can be designated as leadership against one's own will because over time it enhances competition for power rather than the power of the hegemon. These two kinds of leadership may coexist for a while. He then goes on to say, sorry, this is like very important, but I'll get to why. World hegemonies can only arise if the pursuit of power by states in relation to one another is not the only objective of state action. In fact, the pursuit of power in the interstate system is only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the maximization of power vis-a-vis subjects. And this is the crucial sentence. A state may therefore become world hegemonic because it can credibly claim to be the motor force of a general expansion of the collective power of rulers vis-a-vis subjects. That is what we're looking at. It is the collective. American hegemony has been about strengthening the collective power of rulers vis-a-vis their subjects. The subjects is the people, is the working class, is the people who are fucking pissed and in the streets and ready to overthrow governments. Hegemony has been about interstate stability by the rulers of states and the elites within states securing the bag for themselves at the expense of their people. American hegemony has produced revolutionary conditions, and this will not last. It is heightening inequality. It is making political instability, and it will not fucking last. And the trouble right now in 2025 is that the governing elites of all of these Asian governments, they're stuck in the old paradigm, worried about narrow shit like, will America remove its base from our country? Worried about that, as if anybody in the fucking working class of those countries gave two shits about whether an American base was there. There's this huge disconnect. The governing elites of Asia they're on a different planet from their own people. And this entire trip to Asia was embarrassing, not just because America is unpopular and because they showed themselves to be sycophants to power, but also because it's a betrayal of it's trying to cling to an old system of strengthening the rulers vis-a-vis the subjects. The subjects ain't fucking having it. That's where we're at now. Last story here. Trump is expanding the target list for this fake but like very bloody narco-terrorist regime change war thing against Venezuela. He's expanding that to Colombia and Mexico, right? Drop Site News reported this. So obviously, like, I think the body count right now in the Caribbean is 57 people that we've killed illegally with impunity, right? Just bombing ships and no accountability at all. The proximate issue though with like expanding that, why is that expanding to like ensconce Colombia and Mexico, and why is that inevitable? It's because Rubio and Trump have used this claim about drug trafficking to do their illegal bombings of the boats in the Caribbean in the first place. And Trump announced very famously a couple weeks ago, it's time for land action, quote unquote, against Venezuela. What the fuck does that mean? Well, the national security state has to respond to that, right? So the intelligence, so this is Dropsite, quote, Dropsite News says, quote, the intelligence community was tasked with coming up with a more tangible list of targets on land. The problem, however, was that because of Venezuela's lack of significant involvement in the drug trade, the sites were largely in Colombia and Mexico, end quote. So the argument, which is a fig leaf, it's not a real argument, means that Trump has to expand this conflict. It's metastasizing and it's going to ensconce Colombia and Mexico. And I'm promising you right now, it will not stop there unless the American Civil War sort of diverts resources. It's worth noting too, like in Colombia and Mexico, there's left-wing governments right now, and the MAGA version of the Monroe Doctrine is under Trump is like actively trying to install far-right governments across Latin America, right? Maybe like a week ago, I can't remember. I spoke to Jeet here on his podcast, The Time of Monsters. The Nation magazine publishes his podcast, and in that episode, we talked about the Venezuela regime change shit, but we talked about it in the context of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. We kind of laid out all of the competing hypotheses that would explain why we're obsessed with like regime change in Venezuela. And all of those explanations map directly onto an expanding war to include Colombia and Mexico. Like the logic of attacking Venezuela equally applies to Colombia and Mexico. It even more compellingly applies to Colombia and Mexico. It's like the last thing I would say, so you should check that episode out if you haven't listened to it. But the last thing I would say about this is like this bombing with impunity shit, will we or won't we do regime change based on like a whim? This is always what it's meant to do sphere of influence diplomacy. Like a lot of people who identify as realists think that spheres of influence are a way to keep the peace, but an imperialist peace, one, is not durable. They never last. They always collapse into conflict. But two, a sphere of influence, an imperialist peace means war within the sphere of influence. Like the imperialist part of imperialist peace is imperialism, which means all kinds of horrific shit, right? Frontier thinking, dispossession, sacrifice zones, settler violence, extractive regimes. That's what we're seeing. That is American, Latin American policy, right? That is Monroe Doctrine 2.0. So anyways, this is all insane. You should go listen to that Jeet Here episode I did on the Nation podcast to get the breakdown of like how you would map all this stuff. But like you really have no choice but to like embrace or take seriously, you know, what I would call a theory of primitive accumulation to account for all of this stuff. Semaphore, which is a website I hate, but they have reporting that investment firms are salivating at the prospect of moving into a broken Venezuela. Like they would love a regime collapse, right? Because they can capture, this is in the reporting, by the way. This is not fucking Conspiracy Jackson or something. Venezuela, they if they can move in, they can capture its government spending, they can buy up its distressed public assets, and they can extract all of its fucking natural resources, which it is resource rich, right? It's totally fucked up poop, but it's what they are planning. And they're planning it around the premise that America destabilizes the government of Venezuela. And so it's like the classic question, who benefits? Well, the capitalists in all of this imperialist Monroe Doctrine shit. It's the capitalists who benefit, the capitalist class, that is. Not you who believes in a free market, but you who owns the means of production, who probably doesn't listen to this show, right? I don't think there are any owners of the means of production listening to the Undiplomatic podcast, bro. I would be shocked. Everything everywhere all at once. The capitalist class also happens to be the ones who were spending like crazy to oppose Zohran Mamdani. They were also the ones funding MAGA political campaign in the Trump administration, who now is backed into a corner of having no choice but to escalate its ongoing war against America and the working class. So it's all connected, bro. It's all connected. All right. That's all I got for today. Take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves. And I'll catch you real soon. Peace.